Hello, everyone. Okay, thank you very much for coming to EdinburghJS. Tonight we have a travel team talks prepared for you. Thanks to TravelPerk, who is sponsoring the last two and tonight's meetup as well. We have 4 talkers lined up. There's going to be 2 short ones and 2 main speakers. It's all going to be about the travel tech and the travel ecosystem. First up, we have Josh, who's going to be from Edinburgh Future Institute, talking about what they do to support the travel tech. Here you go, Josh.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to be very mercifully short because I'm super keen to hear better and more interesting topics than mine. But I think I just wanted to start off with a huge thank you. I've been working in travel tech for quite a long time now, and I'm just absolutely delighted TravelPerk have, first of all, set up here, but also sponsoring an event that I know brings together the best and brightest of the tech community in Scotland. So very quickly, I'm just going to talk a little bit about why I think travel tech is super important, and then we'll get on to the proper stuff. Right, I won't use that. Let's go on. So basically, what we want to do within the Edinburgh Futures Institute and with part of the Edinburgh Futures Institute that I'm responsible for, called Travel Tech for Scotland, is to try and make Scotland a place to do work in travel tech. At its peak, we had about 200 businesses within this network called Travel Tech for Scotland. It wasn't just Scottish companies, there was a lot of European, some UK companies as well, but it was becoming, and it is becoming, a place known for travel tech, and I think with events like this, it's just going to get better. There's a tourism strategy in Scotland. It's quite a long document, and it does talk about data, AI, and technology. But its ambition is to become the world leader in 21st century tourism. So I think travel tech has a really key role to play. I haven't explained who I am, which is the first mistake. So I work at Edinburgh Futures Institute. My role is to be the director of Travel Tech Scotland, this network of tech companies. The other role is to try and lead research, adoption of technology, AI, and data within travel, tourism, and hospitality. So that's it. So why Edinburgh? Why should Edinburgh be a good place for this? Well, Skyscanner calls it home. As you all know, it's a growing tech hub, and it's an unrivaled tourism destination. But of course, it's also TravelPerk's second home. And I think that's a really important thing. TravelPerk's such a growing company doing really amazing work. But it's not just that. It's not just bagpipes either. There's golf, there's whiskey, there's a whole lot more. But that's actually an important point, which is there's actually quite a lot of parts about the tourism industry in Scotland that lends itself quite well to new technology development. If you look at golf, there really isn't enough technology actually supporting that industry. It's a huge, huge market, and it's still very, very difficult to manage tee time booking across 3 different sites. So that's just one problem. There's a multitude of others. It's a priority for Scotland. That's one of many government documents, but it's probably the only one that references travel tech, so I'll cling on to it for dear life. This is just a few other companies. It's actually, if you could update it now, it's even more. You've just seen QuickServe being acquired by Access. Smartify are a company that was started off down in London, but is now established here in Scotland, and a huge other successes that we can point to. Now, this is the Edinburgh Futures Institute, and it's me. So, admittedly, I don't look like that anymore. That is false advertising. But anyway, that little bit there is a award that is dedicated to travel, tourism, and hospitality tech companies. Now, we're hosting this in the fantastic Fanduel location. What I'd love is to host future travel tech-focused meetups in this building and get more of you engaged in technical discussions around the future of travel tech. Because actually, that's the community that we really want to be bringing out. It's open now. Someone told me that, can we go in? Yes, you can. Please, all come in, work from there, get in touch with me as well. As I fly off. Final thing I'd just say is travel tech is really, really important. Not only is it probably the world's largest employer, it is also a place that has some unique challenges. This was a report we created in 2022 where I boldly predicted AI is not yet ready to hit the market. November 2022, there you are. That's why I've got a very short presentation. But what I was talking here is about there's a massive demographic deficit in travel, tourism, and hospitality. there's a huge opportunity for new technology tools across every aspect of travel, from dreaming about where you're going, to planning, to booking, to experiencing, and then to sharing what you do afterwards. The other thing is we've all experienced it. We've all got our understanding of the problems, the benefits, all this sort of stuff. It's a market that I think Scotland, if it's not already a leader, should be. My only plea to you all is have a great time today, of course, but also think about how you could potentially contribute to this increasingly important sector. So thank you very much. That was hopefully on brief. Can't wait to hear more about what TravelPerk are doing. Can't wait to hear more about what your ideas are. And thank you very much for listening to me. And yeah, let's get on with the real stuff.
I also made the same mistake. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Luce. I'm going to be the guest host for tonight. But trying to give Jamie a little more time. Tonight, the first main speaker is Alasdair. He's the co-founder of TableSense. He's going to be talking about their journey. They use JavaScript in their tech stack. So come on, Alasdair. It's all you.
Hi guys, so I'll start off by confessing that I probably identify as a iOS developer instead of a JavaScript developer right now, but hopefully I kind of see myself as a JavaScript developer now as well. Hopefully I'll kind of give you a bit of context into TableSense, which is a company we started just over 2 years ago now, and kind of our journey into JavaScript from a self-confessed iOS background. So TableSense, just to give a bit of context, we started, like I said, just over 2 years ago in 2022. Our experience before that has really been in hospitality tech all the way through. At Intelligent Point of Sale, iZettle, and at PayPal, all focused on hospitality tech, all focused on helping restaurants. So our mission at TableSense is really helping hospitality and travel tech by helping local restaurants really thrive, whether that be tourism, bringing in tourism, communicating the restaurant's brand across the local community, or more regular customers in the local community. Our mission is to really help those restaurants thrive. So we are building a community of hospitality businesses around the Central Belt right now, and across the UK now. So that's kind of what we're about. Our experience previously, as I said, is mostly in iOS and backend development. So it's been really interesting kind of learning the web development world, seeing how it really compares to iOS development. Hopefully there's some takeaways we've taken from that. We've learned a lot as well through that. So hopefully that's an interesting story. This is not one of our team, by the way, with the cool glasses. This is Rosario. I wish I had those glasses, but I don't. So he's from Locanda Guthrie, you might know, just over in Dalry Road. So we like to think of our customers, it's really a community we're building, where we are bringing out these brands in the restaurants, in the restaurant sector. So just diving into JavaScript stuff. When we started TableSense, we knew, based on our customers, we had to be reliable. That's probably the most important thing for the restaurant industry. It's a core part of their business. That's how they drive their restaurants. That's how they do service booking systems. So they run their tables based on our system. It needs to be up all the time. It needs to be fast. It needs to be performant. It also needs to be accessible. They need to be approachable to people of all abilities, languages, for tourism. It needs to be accessible. So that was a priority for us as well when we started out. As I said before, speed, it has to be performant. In the restaurant industry, staff are running around doing a million different things. We don't want to be, I think there's a bit of a stereotype in hospitality tech where it can be a bit obtrusive to businesses. So we want to make things as simple as possible, as fast as possible. We don't want to encroach on them. We want to enable them. That's really our mission: enable them to thrive. We are again a small team without a JavaScript background. So when we were starting TableSense, that was also a consideration of we don't want to launch into complicated domains. We want to start simple, build and learn. So we had a few principles when we started on this JavaScript journey. Based on our previous experience, we knew we had to keep our domain minimal. We don't want to write some non-application level code which will do things like the phone numbers on the booking form. There's open source tech which is really great at that, and we don't want to spend our time writing that kind of domain code. We want to spend as much time as we possibly can on application level code. That's what we're productive for our customers. We want to keep communication simple in development. I think it's an obvious point, but we want to stick to certain vocabulary. If our vocabulary is as small as possible, then communication in our small team is going to be easier. So we want to call component X this type of component. We want to stick to as few keywords as possible because communication is really hard. And be consistent through that. Again, for the communication point, I think communication when we're building as a small team is probably the hardest thing. So if we're consistent with the communication, I think that's probably the most important thing. So just to give you some context across our product set as we think about developing our web front-end side. We've got quite a few projects that cover different things like booking widget on people's websites, restaurant landing pages where they can link to from social media, the main merchant dashboard where they run their restaurant. That's where they manage tables, that's where they sort out staff rotas, that's where they manage their schedules. And you've got the customer booking side as well, where they can manage the booking. I want to dive into the dashboard a little bit. I think that's probably the most interesting, important part of our product. That's where the majority of development time is spent. Just for some context, we have an Angular workspace that's multi-project, so it's all in the one repo. It's simpler for us that way. We are not that experienced with JavaScript. Angular gives us a kind of equivalent to iOS, I see it at the time. You've got these components. You can build based on composition of those components, which is what we're used to in iOS. I believe React has components as well. Again, iOS developer here. But I think that's part of the main point. I don't see iOS development and web development as separate, being so separate. They are very similar. I think we often get compartmentalized into iOS dev, web dev, but they're really all the same when you think about applying these principles across development. They're the same concepts we've just applied to web that we would on iOS as well. Some more context on the dashboard is, if you're interested in the tech side of things more, you'd use a service worker on the dashboard because this dashboard for managing your bookings in the restaurant has to be fast. It has to be, so we don't need to rely on the HTTP cache for assets. We can just have that locally. We can get background updates for updating in real time when people make bookings. We can use the push notification capability of service workers to tell the merchant when a new booking's been made, when someone's modified a booking. So service workers was a good fit for us for that kind of capability. I'm going to dive in a bit more about sort of the main part of that dashboard, which is our diary. That's where managers of restaurants and staff will spend many hours of their day. So it's really important that we put a lot of effort into this diary to make it as I said before, performant, fast, simple to use. So there's lots of different things you can do on this diary. Probably the most feature-rich part of our product set. But at the same time, it needs to be very simple to use. So you need to drag and drop tables, change your schedule, expand the duration of bookings, move them across different tables. There's a lot of user interaction going on there. It's fairly complicated. At the same time, it needs to be very fast. So when we approached this, we identified those challenges. I think there's a lot of equivalence on the iOS world. Again, it's not really that different. We're used to in the iOS world, Swift UI. I don't know if for people who have got experience in iOS, but it's very similar to the Angular components of observables and pipes. It's very similar to observing state, listening to published objects in Swift UI. They're the same concepts. It's not really different. It's how you apply those concepts. I think that's universal. Applying these concepts with good principles, composing them well and keeping them separate from separate responsibilities is really universal. So I had to have a code slide. So we use, if I go back to the diary, we see this diary it's really a graph. It may not look like a normal graph, but it's really a graph based on the tables you have and the time as it goes across. So I think people are probably fairly familiar with the D3. That's a really famous JavaScript library for graph visualization. D3 within a web framework, we've found it a bit of a challenge to, it's pure JavaScript. It doesn't hook into the Angular or React web framework lifecycle. At the same time, it's got really good code for managing domain and ranges across graphs. And we don't want to write code that translates coordinates to tables and bookings. Again, that's not application code. We don't want to write that. But we took the good parts of, not the good parts, we took the non-UI dependent parts of D3 that does that coordinate space to domain space translation. And we've used that in the Angular structure. So leveraging things like Angular pure pipes here. So we have a scale pipe which can translate from domain space to coordinate space. So we translate from what table you're on and what time you're on. We translate that into coordinate space of where to render that on the graph. Because that's in Angular pure pipes, that just hooks into Angular's lifecycle management. So we get really performant rendering when we're dragging and dropping these bookings and moving them all over the place and different elements get dragged and dropped. We can leverage D3's code to translate coordinate space into domain space and not have to write that code. There's a lot of logic going on there when I talk about dragging and dropping. You obviously can't put two bookings on the same table. You're double booked. Certain bookings might be locked to certain tables because customers want to sit at the booth of the corner. You might have limits on certain booking slots. There's all sorts of complicated logic that goes on when thinking about how to optimize your floor plan. And we think about being helpful there because we can tailor all those settings to the merchant. So there's a lot of logic that goes on there to understand what can be dragged and dropped. So as I said before, we can spend all our time writing that application level code without having to rely on writing this coordinate code. That's how we've done it with Angular, where these are all pipes that translate our times and tables into coordinates, so the x, y coordinates, the width and the height. Again, it's very similar to what we were used to in iOS. It's really the same mechanisms. Angular pipes are sort of like looking at the state annotation on Swift UI views and getting a stream of mouse events from JavaScript is really like listening to a published annotation in SwiftUI. It's the same concept. When we're going into start building all this, there was that preconception of, oh, it's web, it's different from iOS, but it's really, it's probably converged and it's really not different. So I hope to see, I see myself as, they're both the same, they're both the same world. I don't like us talking about different iOS and web. We're tackling the same problems here. So yeah, as I said before, we can write more application level code, be more helpful to our merchants without writing this coordinate space code. That's just one example, but I think that's representative of how we approach things on a web basis from our experience. We don't use a lot of framework libraries and lots of different things. We will when we need to, when there's a special case, when there's a case about accessibility, when there's a case about phone numbers, specialized graph things. But by and large, I think most of us want to write application code as much as possible. That's what we're doing to help our customers. Another good point on this is it is UI independent. So our application level code to manage where we drag and drop bookings. We can use that same code for when you're on a mobile device and you're not using this calendar, but you're similarly using the same logic to work out what tables we can assign bookings on. Again, I'm not experienced in web enough to say, I think the preconception I had was in web, there were classes you would attach to certain elements and IDs you'd attach to certain elements that would then be rendered and you'd get capabilities based on those classes and IDs. I think this approach has worked for us where we're not leaning into that side of things. We're just using the web framework mechanisms to write more application code. I think that's my main takeaway. I've said a few times already. iOS and JavaScript frameworks are really not very different. I hope there's more cross-promotion of communication between the two communities. We're solving the same problems. I think it is also converging already anyway. SwiftUI wasn't a thing 10 years ago, but SwiftUI is probably very similar to React components and Angular components. The declarative nature of writing your template and writing application code to manipulate your declarative template is really similar now. I think we've definitely converged on that. So it's good to see that we're hopefully moving closer together. I would say another key takeaway we've taken here is we were able to learn from our past experience in using these web frameworks we weren't really familiar with. We weren't familiar with Angular, what it meant. But by sticking to use the framework capabilities, understand that this framework capability is helping you with composition. This framework capability is helping you keep responsibilities independent. By identifying those, we've tried to keep to the framework as much as possible. I think that's important to understand what these mechanisms are doing. I think often you see Angular pipes and it's its own thing, but if you can relate that back to an actual best practice, you can kind of understand what it's doing. That's how it's helped us to understand, okay, in the iOS world we do this for this reason. How do we do that in web? Okay, this mechanism is doing the same thing for us. And like I said before, aim for the minimal non-application code you can write, whether that's open source code for helping with phone numbers, translation, or it's this sort of thing where we can take bits of an open source project, not use the D3 graph rendering in pure JavaScript, but we can leverage that for our novel cases. I'd love to hear what the community's experiences are with adopting these sorts of things, what you think of the different communities and how they've evolved, how we've grown closer, I think. I think I'll close on that. I'd be killed if my marketing manager didn't ask me to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn as well. Follow us on LinkedIn as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Alasdair. It's always great to see people transitioning from different framework to another, and gives a different perspective to whatever we're working with. Does anyone have any questions? Sorry. Questions?
So in the JS world, there's a lot of you talk like if you blink, there's another web framework, and if you don't keep your packages up to date, you go back to something you wrote 6 months ago, npm install, and it all breaks. In your experience, have you found that with Angular? I mean, if not coming from a JS world, have you found that you need to keep current, or is it just that it works and you've maybe taken some strategies to mitigate risk there? Or?
I think we've definitely taken the strategy of not thinking first, where is there a framework that does it, feature X that I need? We're very lean on frameworks. I think D3 and a bunch of phone number stuff is probably all we use. I think I know that's a stereotype of like, yes, there's these big package lock conflicts and things. It's not really been a problem for us, I don't think. We've seen a couple of conflicts across things, and we try to keep a fairly large compatibility version, fairly old browsers, because I think a lot of restaurants, sometimes they will have like pretty old Chromebooks or things like that they need to run on. But even with keeping a fairly conservative level of how quickly can we update to the latest version of frameworks, I've really not seen much. I don't know if that's because we're not using a lot of frameworks, or if that's because the community is growing out of that. I can't say I've experienced a lot of it.
Thanks. You mentioned Angular is quite opinionated, and that was quite useful for you coming from like an iOS background. So did you consider React? And I guess like an observation is also, I think conversely, going the other way around, it's actually easier for me as a web developer to go and make a mobile app with things like React Native than it is the other way. There's not an Objective-C web framework, for example. Yep.
I think when we were deciding Angular or React, which I think is the main decision people are making, I think the main thing for us was the separation of component and template really helped us understand what's going on here. We can identify, okay, if this thing's happening on the template side, we're on that side of the view model. If it's on the component side, we're on this application code level side. I think that helped us just on an understanding level, not a kind of, not at code level, but just it helped us separate, in our minds, separation of concerns here. Here's application code and here's a UI template. That was the main thing for us.
I guess just following on from that, do you think your iOS strategy has now changed as a result of going more into the JavaScript world? Do you see you, again, maybe using more technologies to push your JavaScript app into iOS and concentrate more on that, or are you still fully committed to sort of both paths, as it were?
So we do use both paths right now. We have a native app and we have web browser app. I would say it's definitely helped us identify our principles better across the two. Like I said, I think we can relate different concepts across the frameworks, and that's been really helpful for us to understand, especially because we're writing the same code. It's like it's doing the same application code, effectively. We're just doing it on two different systems. So because we can relate the two different techniques, we can say, okay, we're going to write it in the same way. I can't say we've thought much about using the actual technologies in a native app, but it's certainly helpful for us writing iOS code, I would say.
No? Okay, thanks, Alasdair.
Thank you.
Well, we'll have a short break, 5-minute break, because I have a lot more coming. You can grab drinks, go to the toilet, and whatever. We'll be back here in 5 minutes, continue with the 2 other talks. Thank you. Okay. Cool. Continue with the travel team. We have Colin from Bookster using JavaScript and supporting the travel tech. I can't say that word. Travel tech community. There you go.
Yeah, so I'm Colin from Bookster. We are a short-term or vacation rental property management platform. I founded the company along with a business partner a number of years ago. Generally speaking, we operate probably more in the travel tech sphere than fundamentally the JavaScript sphere for this purposes of this talk, but there's definitely a lot of crossover there, obviously. So what we always say is take your property management business further without reinventing the wheel. These are slides that have been taken from other places. You might notice that. But I'll tell you a little bit about ourselves. So we are a property management platform. So essentially what that means is if you have a short-term property, a second home, somewhere that you want to let out for short-term lets, we are a platform that you can come to, whether you're an individual with one property or whether you're an agency with hundreds of properties. We have all the tools in place to help you build that business. As a team, we've been operating in one form or another since 2008, but we've been focusing only on the Bookster product itself since 2020. Essentially, we had a number of other sort of arms of the business, various bits and bobs that we were sort of dabbling into and concentrating on, but slowly those kind of got divested and sold off, and then some of them, one time it actually came back, and then we sold it again a second time. So that was quite impressive, but yeah, we really wanted to focus on one product because as a small team, you need to focus on some of your core products, and we found that when we were doing lots of little bits, we were making a living and providing, but we weren't really focusing on a product and building it up. So what we've always tried to do and always strived for is our sort of company motto, essentially, that experiences matter for the people that are booking, the guests, but also for the operators, our clients, our direct clients. So we're continually adding features and tools and automations to sort of help that process. In terms of our actual stack, traditionally, we're quite a sort of traditional stack of LAMP stack. PHP is still our sort of server-side language of choice. In terms of the front-end side of things, the underlying platform's been going for a number of years, as I said, so there's a reasonable amount of cruft and technical debt that's been built up over the years. So in the early days, it was very much jQuery was the amazing framework that everyone used. Later on, we sort of dabbled into sort of more Angular stuff, not quite fully going to the single page application kind of model, but still sort of having the more sort of dynamic and declarative kind of syntaxes that make it a lot easier. We've also we sort of fundamentally split ourselves into two parts. We're a sort of back-end platform where we manage bookings, and we're targeted at property managers who sort of log into Bookster, use the product to actually manage their day-to-day lives, but also the sort of guest side, the booking side, the getting the bookings in. So we've been able to use different technologies at different times to sort of dabble and find out where we really want to concentrate our time and our development. So in the back end, we've used more Angular stuff. I guess that sort of felt a bit easier from a sort of application-y kind of focus. Whereas on the front end, what we found, it's a bit more dynamic, it's a bit more about the user journey and really sort of less, I suppose, core functional kind of stuff that you need to do, and more of a conversion, getting people to actually make the booking and sort of provide the sort of ease of use and the dynamic kind of bits of actually making a booking. So in that sense, we found React actually worked better for us. There was more sort of open components out there that we were able to leverage. I'll go on and sort of mention a couple of them in a wee minute. And that we were able to contribute back to as well. But I suppose ultimately, one of the main things that I would like to say is the technical debt. We've been operating a long time. There's bits of our back-end platform that have been there since year dot, and they're sort of architectural concepts, and we've built up I guess, UIs and the ability to create certain objects in our sort of architectural model, it's very rarely touched. It's not going to go back and get a full up rewrite because we're too small a team to go back and say, right, we really need to change that and make that so much better because it's used 3 times a year. So, oh no, we'll probably end up having to leave that just now because there are other stuff that we really need to concentrate on. So there is a technical debt. We do need to keep things up to date. We can't let the jQuery version get too old. We'll still have to bring that up. There'll still be changes that we need to do, but ultimately, yeah, you need to manage your technical debt. You need to have at least a strategy of how to deal with it, even if you know you're not going to fully rewrite things and really solve it all. So it's definitely an issue, but it's one that you can manage ultimately and hopefully move on from. But I'd just like to say a little bit about some of the stuff that we actually provide to provide to other developers. So one of the things that we operate under, we're a platform. So other people, web developers out there, might be yourselves, you might get clients, you might get projects, you might get people coming to you and say, oh, I've got a property, I need a booking system, or you know, I'm a restaurant, I need a table booking system. There's probably someone better than me. But you know, we want to make sure that we get out there and we're known to as many people as possible to be a solution that will actually allow you to deliver your client projects. So yeah, we've got the classic kind of widget. You can add it into whatever you need, basic scripts, etc. It appears on, and you can add your booking calendars into various different projects as and when you need. So there's a few of our client websites that use calendar widgets. That's ultimately at the back end. That's a React component. That was one that was developed by a company that I think unfortunately went bust, but the developer who made it was very keen on his work and was able to release it under open source, and we were able to contribute back and add a few additional features and functionality to that suited our needs, which was great. So yeah, that can be used in different ways. We do also have APIs, various things. So, you know, if people want to create their own user journey, they don't have to use our widgets. They can use whatever they want. If they've got a really strong brand, a really strong design, great, go for it. We are essentially a content management system. So we integrate with likes of Airbnb, Booking.com, Vrbo, all the kind of major online travel agents. So we have all the content about your property. So we have the photographs, we have the descriptions, we have the local area, we have all the facilities, all that kind of information. We need that so that we can share it with all these OTAs, all these travel agencies that are out there, and pull in all the bookings that come from that. But what that means is that we've got the data. It's in one place. So if you want to build a great website for a client, use the data that we have. Your client can pull all that data in and you can present it however you want. So if we've not got quite the right widget for you, then that's fine. But it means that they can manage all their content in one place and you can push that all out. So ultimately, just a bit about the company. We're a small company. There's only about 8, 9 of us in total. We've been going for a number of years, a few different people coming and going over the years, but myself and my co-founder are sort of in at the beginning, still going. But what really I think separates us in travel tech is experiences matter. You're dealing with a lot of people. You're dealing with people that are running their businesses. Sometimes it's agencies that are big. They've got a lot of resources, but other times it's an individual. They don't know the marketplace. They don't know necessarily what the best decisions they're making are. So we really think that the experience matters, and we try and provide that great personal support to all of our clients. We make sure that we're committed to climate pledges and responsible tourism and trying to make sure that we can put as much back as we can. So that's just a little bit about Bookster. We're based in Edinburgh. We'll hopefully be coming and joining Josh in the travel tech ward at the Edinburgh Futures Institute soon. We're currently based in Codebase, so I think we'd potentially be going from one of the ugliest building exteriors in Edinburgh to one of the nicest. So that would be quite a nice transition, although I can't say enough nice things about Codebase as well. And internally, fantastic place as well. But thank you very much. That's Bookster, and thanks very much for having me.
Cool. Thanks, Colin. It was great. And continue with the travel team, have the last talk of tonight. It's Gavin from TravelPerk, a sponsor. He's talking about micro-frontends. Take it away.
Just to be clear, I am not the sponsor. TravelPerk is the sponsor, but yeah. Cool. Okay, so I'm Gavin. I'm a senior software engineer at TravelPerk, and today I want to talk about micro frontends. Specifically, I want to talk about like what the micro frontend sort of migration path has been like at TravelPerk. I feel there's quite a lot of like stuff online about how to build micro frontends from like a technical perspective, but not really that much about what it's actually like when you're in the middle of one as just a regular engineer in an organization. So that's what I wanted to talk about. A bit about me. So I started at TravelPerk very recently in August of this year. I thought someone else might talk about what TravelPerk is before me, but it's been left to me to explain. The newest person in the room, but we are like a booking platform for business travelers. So imagine like booking.com or Skyscanner, but it's people who are traveling for work. So we have two sides, like the travelers, and then also like the actual business side of people who want to manage spending on travel and things like that. So the team I joined is the reporting squad. And so we are responsible for sort of surfacing like statistics and data about how travelers are traveling and how much they're spending and stuff like that, so that the company can manage that travel better. I'm going to say like we during this talk, but what I actually mean is the squad that I joined. So yeah, take that with a pinch of salt. And me, most of my experience up till now has been sort of in the front end, so React and TypeScript mostly, but I do work full stack. And my previous job before I joined TravelPerk was with a startup in Edinburgh called Administrate, who you might have heard of. They've been around for quite a while. And during the time I was there, we sort of grew and we talked about doing micro frontends because it's something that tends to come up when organizations get bigger. But it didn't really make sense. We never really got big enough. So it was something that like we talked about, but we didn't get the chance to do. And so when I joined TravelPerk and I heard that they were doing it, I thought it was something I want to get involved with and learn more about, because I've always found the crossover between like front end and infrastructure really interesting. So I guess quickly, what are micro frontends? Because I'm saying this word and you might not know what it is. They're basically like microservices for the front end. So I'm hoping people know what microservices are, but basically, if you have like a big monolithic application, so one huge big application, you might want to split it down into a bunch of smaller components that you can deploy individually and change without it affecting the whole kind of system. So in the context of like a front end, imagine this is TravelPerk. Don't worry, our UI is a lot nicer than this. This is just my little drawing. But we might have like a navigation bar at the top where you can go to different parts of the application and manage your settings and stuff like that. We might have like, we allow you to book flights. So you might have like a searching and booking for flights as the sort of main content on that page. And then we might also have like a little chat bubble down the bottom that you sometimes get on web apps. And that's, you know, a way for people to reach out to customer support or ask questions. So we could actually make each of these things their own micro front end as opposed to it being one big React application. So yeah, we could have like a navigation micro front end, a flights micro front end, and a customer support micro front end. And we could deploy each of those individually. They're their own React applications, let's say, and you can change the navigation micro front end without having to redeploy the flights micro front end. So it gives you this sort of like separation of concerns. And so why do we need micro front ends at TravelPerk? So we're growing really rapidly, and that's why we're doing recruitment. And from a 9-month period from 2022 to 2023, before we kind of decided to move to micro front ends, we did a bit of an assessment and we found that our lines of code had increased dramatically in this 9-month period, unit tests as well, but our CI cost was not at all proportional to that. It had increased massively. So the cost of our continuous integration and deployment pipeline was skyrocketing. And so we did some investigation and we felt like micro front ends were like a good method to go down to sort of improve these things. We felt like it had a number of advantages. It reduces dependencies between teams. Each team can own their own micro front end. They can deploy that. They don't have to worry about what other teams are doing in different parts of the application. They own their whole micro front end. And that means that they can do things like test it differently, build it differently, use different technologies if they wanted to. If they wanted to use Angular instead of React, they could do that, and it wouldn't cause problems. And we think that increases ownership, which in turn decreases tech debt. We heard about tech debt just previously. We feel like tech debt's a lot harder to manage when it's everyone's problem. If you think about like shared ownership is very difficult to do. If you live in like a block of flats, it's very difficult to decide like who cleans the stairwells or the common areas, but it's very clear who cleans each flat. It's the owner of that flat. And we feel like the same sort of thing applies to like the front end. If you have these really clear areas of ownership, then that team is responsible for making sure that they tackle their tech debt. And also, it's them who are going to be slowed down if they don't. It's not the whole department. And also, like I said, it'll help us maintain efficient CI/CD pipelines because it's no longer one huge big pipeline. Every time any change is made, it gets run. It's all these little small pipelines that are only run when they need to be. So how are we doing micro-frontends at TravelPerk? That could be, and actually has been, the topic of a whole other talk. So our principal engineer, Roberto, gave a really good talk at Barcelona.js last year. And I would definitely recommend you go and watch that because he can explain it a lot better than I can. I don't want to get into the technical nitty-gritty of it. I'll share the link at the end of this, and I would definitely recommend going and watching it because it's really interesting. He talks about the libraries that we use, how deployments work, all that kind of stuff. But in terms of timeline, after we decided that there was like a business case for moving to micro front ends, in April of last year, we started with some sort of documentation and training. So we have a platform team called Core Web. So if people don't know what a platform team is, it's basically a team. I would describe it as a team who are building like tools and patterns that other teams can apply to help them build quicker and more sort of consistently. And so we have a platform team called Core Web who manage all our sort of web apps, and they started with training around, how is it going to affect the way I deploy? How is it going to affect the way I have to roll back? And how, what technologies are we using and things like that. So that was the first thing that we started with. And at this point, we have a big sort of monolithic web app. So you can see here loads of different features that we have in TravelPerk. They're all it's all part of one big React application. It's all deployed at once. You can see highlighted in like blue the two features that my team, the reporting team, own. We have a dashboard which has loads of like statistics, and then like all good tech products in 2024, we do have an AI feature, of course. And so yeah, we basically had this huge big web app. And what's the first step to moving to micro front ends? Well, the first step was actually just to migrate to a micro front ends architecture on production, which sounds confusing when I say it, and is probably also going to be confusing when I try and explain it. But basically, we have our big web app, and all we do is we say, actually, this big web app is now our first micro front end. It's our web micro front end. And so we take the exact same app, but we just package it up in a slightly different way and deploy it the same way that we're going to deploy all of our micro front ends. So now we know, okay, this deployment mechanism works. It doesn't give us any of the advantages because it's all just one huge big application, but it means we have the sort of pipeline and process in place to be able to spin up new micro front ends and know that they work. So in November of 2023, we did our first real micro front end. And that was exactly what I said earlier, like a little support chat micro front end. So that means we can update that without having to update the rest of the application. And it has its own deployment and things like that. And so that was really successful. And off the back of that, we basically started this push for every team to move all the features that they own into micro front ends. And we decided that December of 2024, so the end of this year, is when we're going to stop supporting that sort of web micro front end, which isn't really a micro front end, but has everything in it. So basically, we had this push for teams to move away from that before then. So what have my team had to do? So like I said, we have these two features. We need to move them into this new reporting micro front end. We're not changing anything. We're just changing the deployment of it into this own little container that we can deploy when we want. And the first step of that is just building that like container, building that micro front end. And luckily, like I say, we have a platform team. They made this micro front-end generator that makes it really easy to spin up a new micro front-end. You run this one command. It creates like the continuous integration and deployment pipelines. It scaffolds the React project, make sure that it's all deployed correctly, and you basically end up with this like hello world micro front end that has nothing in it, but you know that you can start to deploy. And so we created that reporting micro front end in May of this year. And then the next thing is we need to like move some features into it. So the easiest migration path is just to take the code we had before and just move it into this new container, right? Like it's not any different. It's still React and TypeScript. We can put it in one place or the other. It doesn't matter. And really the sort of the nitty-gritty of it is at a much higher level, and at our team level, it's just code in one place or the other. That's a slight simplification because there is things like dependencies. We need to make sure we're not depending on anything in the web micro front end before we move over. But that's relatively minor. It's like changing imports and copying and pasting some code and stuff like that. So that was what we did with the reporting AI. That was our feature that we'd worked on most recently. I say we, again, I still wasn't here at this point. But they had worked on most recently, and it's a nice small sort of feature. It gives us a good chance to like iterate, get something out, make sure it's working, and we have no issues. So we did that, and we released that in June of 2024. And that was really successful, and we got it into production, and there was no issues. And so then the last part is we need to move the other feature we own, this reporting dashboard, into our reporting micro front end as well. And this is where I joined. And right as we were starting this, and I thought this was a good thing to get involved with. And so we said, cool, let's do the same thing we did before. We'll do a lift and shift and move everything over. And then rolled around BuildCon, which is basically, it's a big offsite that engineering, product, and design do every year at TravelPerk. We go off to Barcelona. We do like talks and workshops and team building activities and stuff like that. And it's a good chance to like meet people in person, which is what the whole like goal of TravelPerk is. We want to bring business travelers together. So it's a good excuse for us to all get together. And at that, Roberto, who's the person whose talk I mentioned earlier, he was there, and we got speaking to him about micro front ends, and we told him about our plan to do the lift and shift, and he said, well, actually, why don't you just rebuild it from scratch? Like, just throw away what you have and just start again. And I don't know if it was the Barcelona sunshine or the open bar, but he managed to convince us that that was the right thing to do. And the benefits we saw of that were that it would help us refactor and simplify the code, because we now have all this context, right, of like how reporting has developed over multiple years at TravelPerk. We can learn from that, and we can see these patterns now and start to build from scratch with those. And it would also allow us to own our code from the ground up. A lot of my team, including myself, obviously, are new. And that's not to say that like you can't work on other people's code. Obviously, it's not sustainable to just rebuild every application every time someone joins. But we thought this gave us a good opportunity to actually own the code and make it much more maintainable for ourselves in the future, because we'd know it inside and out. And also it allows us to follow latest best practices, both in industry, but also inside TravelPerk. A lot of the code was older, and we'd sort of moved on in what our patterns and practices were since then. So I guess the interesting part is, like, has it been successful? And I'm afraid I can't actually tell you that, because we are still in the middle of it right now. But the early signs are really, really good. We feel like we're ending up with a much more sort of sensible, like concise code base that's like purpose built, and we're managing to fix bugs as we go because we're rebuilding each of these things from scratch. Obviously, we're using the old code as reference, but it's good to try and do it from as scratch as possible. But what I can say is that other teams who have done this have really benefited from it. So this is a member of the Cars squad, so a different team, last week posted this on Slack, and you can see they call out things like they also did a move to a brand new micro front end, like from scratch, and you can see they call out things like much quicker development speed, faster builds, a more stable pipeline. They talk about how they're onboarding people, and because they have a really sensible code base, it's really easy to onboard people. So I think you can see evidence that it really has worked for some teams. And so I guess what I've learned from this are some things that I think you can apply if you're doing a micro front-end migration, but also I would say these things apply to pretty much any big project. And one is having a team that's leading the migration. So like I said, we have our core web platform team, and having a team like that who are owning it, they can really make sure that all different teams are talking, that the business value is communicated to leadership, that progress is being made, that it's not just going stagnant. And they can also act as sort of domain experts. So if you run into a problem with the micro front end, you can go ask one of them, get them to come help you out. And that falls on to the next point, which is good tooling and docs. So obviously it's great being able to go and ask someone, but even better is if you can just go read a doc and it tells you what to do. And better still is you don't even have to read a doc, you just run one command and it does it all for you. So I think another interesting thing about this is that it can actually act as a sort of living document of what the correct state of a micro front end is. So if you make sure you're updating your templating or scaffolding tool every time you discover something, then that serves as a reference point for people to go and see, oh, how am I meant to do this? Oh, well, this is how the scaffolding tool's doing it. And then the next one feels very obvious, which is share knowledge and learn from other teams. You would hope that people are talking and sharing knowledge, but obviously, the whole goal of this project is to make teams more independent, so they don't have to be dependent on each other. And so I think it's really important that you make sure that you've still got communication channels in place to make sure teams are talking. And an example of that is when Roberto told us about this other approach that other teams had done of a rebuild. And if we didn't know that, we would have gone down the other path. And I think you really see the benefit of that communication. And so, for example, like we have a front-end guild, TravelPerk, and we make sure that people who are interested in front-end from all across the department are meeting there and pushing forward proposals and initiatives and things like that. And the last point is one that I personally feel is quite interesting, which is that I always learn about like don't repeat yourself in code. Make sure you're abstracting things and pulling out commonalities. But if you do that with micro front ends, you're going to end up with like a distributed monolith. You're just going to the same dependencies that you had before in a single application. You're just going to have moved out to these like shared packages or libraries that all of them use. So you still have the exact same problem. So it was really difficult for me to get my head around this. Like it's not bad to copy and paste code as long as you're not. As long as you're not giving like an inconsistent user experience or really important business logic isn't a risk of like drifting in two places, then it's totally fine, right? That's what you want to do because you get the benefits of the whole migration. And the last thing we learned, which sort of calls back to what Jamie was saying about there's a new JavaScript framework every week or whatever, is that we've actually decided to revisit the whole high-level architecture for micro front ends because we've had a chance to try it out and learn from it, and we've realized, oh, actually, this approach that we thought was going to be good for us at the start is not the best. So we're not moving away from micro front ends. We are still going to be doing them. It's just a slightly different way of slicing them and deploying them. So again, it's at that higher level, the stuff that I'll show you in a minute, Roberto's talk, that he talks about in that. So it doesn't really affect my team. It's still the same sort of benefits for us and the same migration path that we're already doing. It won't be thrown away, but it's definitely changing how the architecture is. And I think that's a good example of learning from what we're doing. And I think that's all I wanted to say. So thank you. And here's a link to Roberto's talk, so I definitely recommend watching it. Sorry.
Gavin, the QR it's a great talk. We use Micro-frontends at work, and I had the same kind of issue with getting terms with copying code and making sure it's individual. But yeah, does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
That was a great talk, so thank you very much, Gavin. You
Thank
beat
you,
me
Ross.
to my first question, which was going to be about the dry principle. I broadly agree with what you said around not wanting to reintroduce too many dependencies across teams, so that was going to be my question, but you got ahead of me on there. So I guess my follow-up would be, you talk about having good documentation and good communication, and I find, especially if a company is growing quite rapidly, that gets increasingly difficult to do well. So how do you do that well?
We don't. No, I mean, like, I think what I will say is, like, we're very good. There is a lot of documentation at TravelPerk, almost to the point where, like, there's too much. And so I think what we're trying to do is find the right tools to help surface the useful documentation. Part of that is, again, back to like the ownership thing of like teams have to own their own docs and make sure that they're maintainable for people. But also like, oh God, I'm going to talk about AI. But we have this tool called Unblocked, which is really useful. It'll like index Slack and all the Notion docs. And so I think, yeah, it's hard to do documentation well, obviously, and I don't think like we've got it sort of solved. But I think I would really recommend Unblocked almost just as like a Notion, or like if you use Confluence, I'm sure it works with Confluence as well, like a search tool. We've found that really useful because it just parses all that. It looks at Slack, it looks at GitHub, and it pulls it all together and gives you it in like a useful way. So I ask it like everything, like not even technical things. Like I asked it, why are we moving away from this approach of micro-frontends to this other one? And it gave me like the links to the relevant docs and stuff.
So how do you share data between the micro-frontend and state? So for example, if I was to search for a flight and then I'm on a car bit, how do you reference that flight search?
Yeah. So, I mean, for this, you have to push a lot of stuff to the back end, right? Like a lot of that state now has to live in the back end because otherwise you have the same problem of now you're sharing state between things and you have this dependency. So I would say that is really how we're solving it. And also, I think that's where picking the boundaries of your micro front end are really important. Like you want to try and pick them in a way where you're not having to share stuff across state. Obviously, the exact example you gave is the one that we sort of run into of like we have checkout and we have like we let you buy hotels, flights, trains, car rentals. So you have all these different things which are all their own teams and their own micro front ends, and now it all pulls together into one checkout process. I'm probably not the best person to answer that, but I would say it is that thing of you just need to push as much of that to the back end as possible so that you're just calling an API and it's all abstracted away behind that API.
Sorry, another question if I may. You talked about your front-end guilds. Could you talk a little bit more about how that works and how that's set up?
So I think guilds are something, even at my previous place at Administrate, we did try and do guilds and it didn't really work. I think you need to have people who are willing to like put in the time and put in the effort to like maintain it. But the way we basically run it is someone gets nominated I think we meet every 2 or 3 weeks or something. And basically a random person is nominated from the list of people who attend. They're responsible for basically just chairing the meeting, but anyone can put forward a proposal. So it tends to be more sort of proposal based, although it can also be discussion. And so that might be, yeah, like even small things, like we had a proposal to like our ESLint configuration. And so you have to kind of make a case of like, here's why I think this is like worth us spending time on. Here are the different options. And then we basically sort of vote on like, who's going to take this forward. Quite often, those things will end up going to the platform team, like Core Web. If it feels like it's something that covers all the sort of front end, then it makes sense for them to champion that. But also it could be someone from another team who's taking ownership over that.
What happened to the repos? Did you keep a mono repo, those tools to do that?
Yes, we have a mono repo. And we also have a design system, which I didn't talk about, but Roberto does talk about. And so we have our design system and all our micro front ends in a single mono repo. So like in theory, it makes it quite easy to manage. I would say I am obviously more of a consumer than the person who's like setting up and maintaining it. But as a consumer, it's quite easy to run different micro front ends together. Yeah, Roberto goes into his talk, but we use like import map overrides. So basically we allow you to like use the staging version of different micro front ends unless you specifically want to override it with your local version. So it makes it really easy to sort of maintain it. And I think monorepo seems to be, from what I've read, the way most companies are doing micro front ends.
Thank you.
Thank you. My question, what was your approach to the transition from the old infrastructure to the new one? Like, did you at the time support both versions, or did you froze like the development of the old one? And
That's a great question that I actually don't know the answer to because I wasn't here. And that hasn't come up when I've been sort of reading about that. But I think, like I say, I don't know exactly how the specific switchover went, but that move of deploying the existing thing we had as a micro front end was like the easiest way to do a really small switch, right? Like obviously it is still quite a big switch, but you're not changing any of the application level code, right? You're just changing how it's deployed. So like in theory, if it loads,
you just said that you wrote everything from scratch, so like.
Sure, yes, sorry. So I guess like the rebuilding stuff from scratch has been much more our team's like domain-based code, not the entire application, like not authentication and things like that. It's much more our team's sort of like page level and root level like code.
Yeah, but like for the reporting page, for example, did at the same time users not...
yes, exactly. No, that's sorry, I understand what you're saying now. Yeah, so we basically ran, we just added feature flags to handle routing between the two. And the tool that we use that manages all of micro front ends is this thing called single spa. And you basically like set up different routes and which micro front end will handle that route. So we basically had the same things in both the old like web micro front end and our new micro front end, and only one of them would actually render on that route. So they would both have that route defined, but based on a feature flag, only one would render. So that meant that like we can manage which version they're getting by rolling out a feature flag. And actually last week, my team ran into an issue where we realized that translations weren't working in our micro front end. It was really simple to roll that back by just flicking the feature flag, and we're back to the old version again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great. I just had a question about how does it all get stitched together? Because you mentioned, for example, different front-end frameworks. And I also think, what if two micro front-ends have similar dependencies or just just the same?
Yeah.
Do you ship the code twice to the client or?
So again, I'll pitch Roberto's talk because he can explain it better than me. So I definitely recommend watching that for this question. But basically, yeah, we use this tool called Single Spa. We have this import map. And so basically what we have is we say that like React, for example, obviously, so we don't use any different frameworks. We're all using React in the front end, but in theory, we could be using different ones. But yeah, for shared dependencies like that, we are actually extracting those shared dependencies into one place. So they are loaded once when like the container Single Spa loads, and then it's shared between all the different micro front ends. And so that is part of the reason why we're moving away from this approach. We're going to move to more what we call like vertical split micro front ends. So like each entire page is going to be its own thing, its own. It's difficult to explain, but we're doing that, and part of the reason we're doing that is because then we don't have to share dependencies. And so then things like if one team is locked on like a lower version of React or whatever, we don't have to worry about other teams having to share that dependency of being locked to that. Okay. But yeah, so it's basically we're extracting our shared dependencies and they're loaded once.
Okay, I quite like that answer. And another thing, what is the downside? So everything that you've mentioned today seems kind of good, aside from like the hassle of actually setting it all up. And I imagine the CI/CD is like crazy. What is the biggest downside?
I mean, I think it's probably the exact same downsides as you get from like microservices. So, which someone else could probably answer better than me, but like it's harder to debug, right? Because you need to think about how do all these things interact. It's harder to develop because now, like you say, your development environment is a lot more complex. So I would really just say it's like complexity is the biggest problem. And luckily we have the resources of like that platform team who can really kind of push this forward. But if you didn't have that, which is part of the reason why at my previous place we didn't do it, like it just doesn't make sense unless you've really got the time to spend on it. And I think, yeah, it's a really big question. And like I think you could probably even argue like, did it make sense for TravelPerk to do it now? And I think we spent a lot of time looking at the numbers for that and saying, yes, we do think it's worthwhile. But yeah, I think the downside is just complex.
Thank you.
Thanks. You previously mentioned single SPA. have you heard the reason that lead the choice over module federation or Hypernova or everything else?
I don't know. I know it was a discussion, right, around module federation and other approaches. Why we landed on single spat, I don't know. I think there was maybe this sort of hype around like import maps, and I think single spat works quite well with that, and that was the sort of intention. But I will say one of the main reasons we're changing the architecture is because of single spat. Like from what I've heard, it's maintained by sort of a solo developer. It's not got very good buy-in. It's not being well maintained. And so that, amongst other reasons, like shared dependencies and things like that, is part of the reason we're moving away. I don't know why we made that decision, but it is documented somewhere in our pile of documentation.
So we had a lot of talk about dependencies, right? Where we have dependencies, we usually have blockers. Do you find lots of blockers during your work?
Say that again. Lots of.
How many blockers, and what's the time spent on resolving them usually?
On resolving. Sorry, I can't hear what you're saying. Blockers.
Yeah.
Like okay, sure. I mean, again, sort of before my time of when I've joined, we've been moving to micro-frontends, so it's been relatively constrained. But I think it's micro-frontends doesn't necessarily change that, right? Like obviously it is part of the reason why we're moving to micro-frontends, but it's the same problems you have with like domain-based squads in any department, right? You're going to have initiatives that need to move across multiple domains, and I think micro-frontends at least restrains that to just like a product thing. From a technical perspective, it's now just like, okay, well, we just need to make our changes in our one micro-frontend without changing others. So I think probably a better description of those like dependencies or blockers, things like that, are around like incidents and things like that. So like one person makes a change in flights and it takes down cars or whatever. Like it's things like that tend to be the bigger blocker, I think, where again, if you have these independently deployable microservices or micro front ends, it's a lot easier to sort of, you need to plan around them not being able to talk to each other, and you can make them a bit more resilient.
Another question about the microphone. In terms of testing, are you testing this as a one single unit or?
It's a really good question, and we're doing both. So we have testing. Yeah, I guess I'll repeat it in case. So how are we testing these, basically, was the question. Is it one thing or multiple smaller things? And so testing isn't my strong suit, but I guess it's very similar to like the testing pyramid kind of thing of like we have a lot of like unit and integration tests at the individual micro front end level. We then have like Cypress tests that are mocking that from like, they mock the API, but we test the whole UI together like a user would in the browser. And then we have integration tests, which are testing all of our micro front ends together, but again, stubbing the back-end API, and that's again done with Cypress. So we have less of those integration level tests and more of the individual micro front end tests. So that, but yeah, it's all run on every single build. So I think testing is probably the area that we'll need to look at as we continue to move to this, because we probably need to rethink our strategies around that, I think.
Oh, sorry, I have to cut. Sorry, I had to cut the question short. We need to be out of here in 5 minutes. Yeah, we have one final quick shout out from Neil from TravelPerk.
Don't worry, guys, it'll be 1 minute, not 5 minutes. Hello, hello. So not used to having a microphone, actually, so might burst into song. Yeah, I just wanted to literally thank the speakers. Thanks, Gavin and the guys for jumping up today. Really cool to hear from you guys, and appreciate everyone coming. I guess the reason I'm coming up here today is just to say hello from the sponsor. I work at TravelPerk, as you can all see. We really enjoy sponsoring these events. I think the travel tech industry right now is in a great place, and it's really, good, for lack of a better phrase, to see all you guys in real life, which we love at TravelPerk. So yeah, thanks again for turning up. just a very quick kind of update on where we are with things. So I've been working in the recruitment team at TravelPerk now for a couple of years. During the last 2 years, we've been recruiting, front end, back end, full stack, mobile, basically everything in the world of software engineering. So that's going to continue to happen. I think starting next year, we're basically going to kind of get our ducks in a row and figure out where we are with things in terms of headcount and hiring. And I think Gavin mentioned wherever he's sitting that we're going to have
hi.
We're going to have a big kind of push on recruitment next year. So really exciting times at TravelPerk. And if anyone wants to have a chat about opportunities, I'm definitely not here to do the big sell, so don't worry guys. But if anyone wants to hear about opportunities that we have at TravelPerk, it'd be great to connect either tonight in person or connect with me on LinkedIn. Yeah. I've been told there's a QR code on a piece of paper next to the pizza boxes. Never mind the digital screen and stuff. Yeah, we're going old school with TravelPerk for this. So yeah, if anyone wants to see what opportunities we currently have just now, please feel to have a look at that, or like I said, come and have a chat with me. And yeah, just thanks again for everyone for turning up, and enjoy the rest of the night. Thanks a lot.
Cool. Thanks to all the speakers tonight. Thanks for everyone turning up. This is the last meetup of the year. I think there's going to be a social one next month, maybe.
People won't have a social in December.
Yes.
Yeah,
cool. Cool, there we go. Thanks again, TravelPerk, for sponsoring. I think that's it for now. We're going to Fanduel Bridge after this, so you're welcome to join. That's pretty much it. Cool, thank you.